Good afternoon and welcome to Agrifood Conversations brought to you by iSelect Funds, the Van Trump Report, the Yield Lab Institute, and Family Farms Group. My name is David Yoakum, an associate on the iSelect Ventures team, and I'm excited to walk you through today's call. Agrifood Conversations is all about driving innovation in agriculture. Each month, we highlight a specific theme, including emerging topics such as soil health, plant genetics, vertical farming, and aquaculture, to name a few. On today's Agrifood Conversations call, we are joined by Dr. Chris Handel, Vice President of Strategy and Operations for CoverCress. CoverCress is a new oilseed crop grown over winter between normal full-season corn and soybeans. It acts like a cover crop while also producing oil and high-protein feed that can fit markets similar to canola. CoverCress was developed from pennycress. Native pennycress grain has high levels of erucic, fiber, sinigrin, which are compounds that limit the oil and meal use, but CoverCress has developed varieties that have a new composition and make CoverCress a brand new crop for the American Midwest without the limitations that native pennycress has. Each of you knows that companies are more likely to succeed with the right network of customers, talent, investors, and advisors. We have invited you to this call because you are some of the smartest and most talented people in CoverCress's market. You are potential customers for CoverCress's products and services. You built and or sold a company like CoverCress, or you are a sophisticated business person who understands CoverCress's market and the challenges it may face. But before we get started, we have a quick poll question to get a better idea of who we have on the call today. Please take a few seconds to answer. But before we begin, first a few process comments. One, we are not soliciting investment. This presentation is to provide information about CoverCress's products and services to help them find customers, mentors, and other strategic relationships that can help them grow their business. Two, you are all on mute. You can use the chat window to ask a question, and after the formal part of the presentation, we will answer as many questions as time allows. And three, this presentation is being recorded and will be available for replay within 24 hours. So without further delay, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Chris Handel, Vice President of Strategy and Operations at CoverCress. Please take it away, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us, and I hope you enjoy the talk, and I will be open for questions at the end then, as you just described. So I'm just flipping through the initial iSelect slides and then arriving to CoverCress. So we intend to be the first cash cover crop for the Midwest. And also one of the most important things about our crop is the low carbon intensity, and I will describe more as we go. So CoverCress was founded on the idea of using not only open land, but also all the farm equipment that is not being used over winter. So right now in the American Midwest, the vast majority of the land is used either in corn or soybean, most of it in the corn-soy rotation. So there is, for CoverCress to be able to be planted, we go only from the harvested corn into planting soybeans. So CoverCress will be planted either at corn harvest or just before or just after corn harvest, so just around corn harvest. And in that sense, there are about 30 million acres available in that condition every year in the Midwest. The three main topics that really excite us about this concept is that we bring extra farmer cash or overall margin for the farmer. So we did some farmer research, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. But the farmer would get from $50 to $70 per acre, and that's net. And will be able to plant his soybeans at normal time. We also see that we enable a whole downstream value chain here with a low carbon intensity feedstock. This is especially important for all the biorenewable renewable diesel and jet, as well as for food, of course. The millennials and the new generation are very, very focused on carbon, not only carbon intensity, but also just footprint. So we are working with both. And really interesting too is how scalable this idea is. And I will show you some numbers at the end. So we're thinking about a potential for 10 million tons, but I'll show you the acreage also, how it goes. So here's a little about our history. So we are on our 7th year, and we've just planted replicated EO trials in the fall. And we did an initial germplasm collection. So during 2013, when the company was founded in 2014, the two main tasks were establish a germplasm bank and start the team and the plant breeding work. Then we grew from there into developing like more partnerships, especially with universities in the beginning. Now we're much more focused on downstream partnerships. And also we started with a very heavy load of work on lab and gene editing and working with the composition of CoverCress, which brought this brand new crop to the table, like David described briefly at the beginning. We plan to be going to our first commercial launch in the fall of 2021, and then that means a harvest in the spring of 2022. So then it will be when really the processing part will start, and by 2023, we want to have anywhere from 120 and 200,000 acres, depending on how the start point goes. Here's a little more on history and more details. So pictures, I think pictures are really worth 1,000 words. And you can see the map there. That's a very important one on the map of our native pennycress collection. So we have about 1,000 lines collected. If you see, you can't see the exact location of the dots, and that's okay. The red dots are our own private collection, and the blue dots are the collection we have in partnership with Western Illinois University. So that added both collections together add to about 1,000 lines. And then the main change that we did. So as David described, we have 3 composition traits that we really significantly changed. You can see almost in the center of the slide there how the visual part changed. So pennycress originally, the native type, has a very dark seed coat, like dark brown. And with one gene knockout, we made this into a yellow light seed coat grain. That is important not because of the color itself, but it's important because the fiber is reduced very significantly, around 50% reduction there, which makes the meal out of this grain, this oil seed, much better for animal feed. Excuse me. So, excuse me for a second. So the fiber is one of the components that we changed. We changed 2 others. They're more oil related. So one is we knocked out the gene that produces erucic acid. So erucic acid is a component in the oil that makes it non-edible. And by knocking out that gene, the plant does not produce that in the seed. So now we have a double use grain. So the CoverCress grain can be used both for fuel and for food oil. We do not have the regulatory approvals for that yet, as we're still developing the crop. You see, as you saw on my previous slide, you saw that we actually have time to get those approvals, and that's all in our launch timeline. The third composition gene that we changed is for glucosinolates. So glucosinolates, they are a component that actually provides plant protection. And what we did is we knocked that out, and because it's an anti-nutritional, so it's kind of like a wasabi taste for animals. So not all animals like wasabi tastings, and they're very strong, and we knocked that out so that animals would eat that fine. That has no impact really on the use of the oil, except for some residual taste if in the food oil industry, okay? So that's just images of the grain and a pile grain and things like that. So in the agronomy part of things, this is how we see the flow. So we see, and I have a map at the end, but there are 30 million acres going from corn to soy. We're saying that we're going to use about 10 of those in growing into 10 of those. And what happens here is that CoverCress is overseeded on the surface in September. And that happens either right before corn harvest, could be even early seeded, or at corn harvest or very shortly after corn harvest. So what we try to do is to follow whatever the farmer does. So if the farmer does tillage, we have some practices that will be okay with that. And then if he does no-till, we can also have planting practices that will allow that. In the second picture is how the crop looks between like late October and February, depending a little bit on the type of soil and exact latitude and things like that. In early spring, we do need about 50 units of N applied because everything else is scavenged from the leftover from the corn. In April, you'll see a beautiful crop. It's about, I get a lot of questions on how tall this is. It's about mid-thigh, I would say, at flowering and early potting. Might get a little bit taller, but not much. You can harvest it with a regular soybean combine in May. Our goal is to have it fully harvested by mid-May. Right now, our top lines are doing probably third week of May. And so what that is telling us is that we're going to start growing this on the southern half of the Midwest and then grow to the north as we develop earlier and earlier lines. So the June picture is already full, like growing soybean. And this picture here was on a field that was planted the same day, was no-tilled in the same day that we harvested CoverCress. On the products, again, it's oilseed, so oil and meal. Both the oil can go both ways, either diesel or either biodiesel or any type of renewable fuel or food. Again, we're working on the regulatory parts of this. The protein with the lower fiber, it actually compensated a lot on the protein, so we get high protein and low fiber in the same knockout, which was very nice. If you want to think about oil composition or meal composition, it's very, very similar to canola, both of them. So then you can have an idea if you're more interested in details on this. You can also reach out and I can send more information on details of the oil and meal composition. We have done smaller scale feeding trials, but we're increasing that all the way to 2021. You just need a lot of grain to do those, and we're just increasing that right now. Carbon intensity is really critical, as I mentioned before. So here, what you can see, we did preliminary analysis, and that's more on the bottom part of the slide. And our carbon intensity is around 30. If you look at the kind of the top half of the slide, you see that it's in line with electrical cars. There are many, many twists to all of this, but it's a pretty good carbon intensity score. And with this number, we can get into the California market. Here are more pictures on types of tillage and stands in the early in the fall, and different ways that we can do that, even with aerial. With more on planting, and get a lot of questions on planting. One thing that we're trying also is a seed treatment to increase this germination, and it barely adds any cost, and it really does increase not only germination but fast germination in the fall and very good plant vigor, early vigor, which is critical in our operation. This is also a question that we get a lot on yield. So how much yield does this have? So if you look here, with this chart, it looks a little complicated, but what this shows is that our first goal on yield was 1,500 pounds per acre, and we moved to 2,000 pounds per acre by 2027, okay? Most critical part. The 1,500 pounds per acre, we mapped that goal back in 2017. And you may ask, if you look at all the bars, it's like, why in 2017 you have all these lines and then later on you have fewer? Just because of the number of locations and number of replications. So when you add, because of differences that happen across locations and in each field, when you have more and more fields, you do get average changes because of whatever conditions we had, not this past year, but the year before. We had a lot of flooded fields, so that reduced our numbers, and things like just regular environmental things. The good thing on this is that we're testing our plots in more types of soil and in broader ranges of locations, both northwest, north, south, and east-west. More pictures again, and here you can see on the bottom left, you can see a shovel right there into those plants. And those are at flowering stage, so they do get a little taller than that. Then you can see the bottom right, the right at harvest picture. It turns brown and it starts really getting like brittle and breaking. Very easy to harvest. On timing here, there are some farmers on the line there. We do get a lot of questions on timing of harvest because it's so critical for the farmer to be able to plant soy right away and to get the yield, right, to get the heat units for the soy to really produce well. On that top picture there where you can see the top left is that, think about that field as like being a quilt. So that's an experimental field. So each 5 by 20 plot is a different genetics. What you can see on that brownish spot that has the arrow on is that material is much earlier, or it's matured earlier than other genetic lines. You can see in the back of the arrow there fully green lines. So we do have genetic materials that are earlier than the rest. And then the second picture that's a little hard to see, what you see is a cross of that genetic material, which is just a native line crossed with very high yielding materials. And you see from left to right higher maturing or earlier maturing dates on progeny lines. So you see that within the crosses that we're making with that line, we are getting earlier and earlier material. So we're very confident that we'll get to the mid-May goal before we launch the product. We're also exploiting some molecular tools with the universities that we have partnered with to get this done faster and faster. I did put some exact dates of harvest there. One thing that you have to pay attention is that our harvest dates there are all for experimental fields. What that means is that we only go in with the combine when the later lines are ready. So it's always like a much later date than what we really believe we can harvest. So we would not release a line that was ready so late as some of these dates are showing. Here's some work with the farmers that we did. So we did some external marketing work with a company called Kinetic. We have done also qualitative groups. So we meet with small groups of farmers for breakfast, for lunch, and discuss all this, the idea, how they feel about it, what they feel are the greatest points and the lowest points on it, and also use a lot of USDA data. The bottom line here is that a $50 per acre margin will get farmers to start this. That they do want to know details of post-harvest and how they're going to manage the growing industry we are working with right now. The May 25th to 31st, which is last year we were already very flexible with that date, so we're okay that will happen constantly with the farmers. That's okay to get this started. The farmers do want to see this happening, so we need some few early starters to have good experience with it, and then others will follow. So they say that a lot. They say they want to see it happening on the field, and they want to give part of the field, not put their whole field, which we also don't want them to do to get this going. A little more on farmers. Some interesting things, you want to focus on the map here and see where our initial areas are. So the two dark ovals there are where we're thinking to get started. And the little round dots, you see that the ones that are very light blue are the farmers saying, I would only plant this if we can guarantee me a May 15th harvest. Then we go to May 20th, 25th, 30th. We're going to have a few red dots there that say, no, I'm not interested. Farmers are very interested in cover crops, but the thing is that right now, cover crops are an expense and not a center of direct revenue. They do worry a lot about soil health and having, sorry, there's something coming on my screen here. They do worry a lot about soil health, and they want to keep that doing well for their farms. But the investment at this point in time in farming is really critical, that they have options that bring extra revenue and not are taking away revenue from them as this current cover crops are doing. This is a very interesting thing. It's our business model, and how we see this is a closed loop business model, and we're working on the partnerships for this to work right now. So we see the three main parts of our business model are, of course, ourselves, the farmer, and the processor. And then we have the final users that would buy from the processor. How we see this is that we actually provide, we're not a seed company that sells seed to farmers, we'll provide the seed to farmers. And we'll get a revenue at the very end after the processor sells the product. We might even provide custom planting for the farmers because we did see some of this come up on our marketing research. The farmer will use the land over late fall to early spring. The farmer will have to plant, fertilize, harvest, and deliver the grain. So those are the tasks that the farmer will do. When the farmer delivers it to the processor, we're also evaluating some collection points and things like that. So that's not like really written in stone. And the processor will do all the little cleaning steps that might be needed, extra cleaning after harvest, sell the oil and the meal, get the cash, and then share that revenue back to the farmer and with us. So that's our closed loop business model, which is used for some of the specialty crops already. Here's what I mentioned to you about the maps with the number of acres. So right now we see that it's just basic USDA data, and it's on the conservative side. So usually in the Midwest, in the southern Midwest actually, there are about 30 million acres available going from corn to soy. So the total corn soy rotation, it's actually over 70, but we're using 30 as half. So we're being a little conservative here. Then we're saying that farmers would only go to 1/3 of their acres with CoverCress and leaving the other 2/3 completely flexible for soybean planting as they go. And then we're saying that from those 10 million acres, we'll reach 3 million by 2030. Then we do get some questions about external, like international opportunities. We did search a lot on this. There are some opportunities, but the Midwest is by far the biggest and more concentrated one. We expect about 10 million acres outside of the U.S. that could be used with the same model. Then I put some data here for markets on the oil use and the meal use. So, for us, one of the questions that we get a lot is how much of this market do you see yourself taking over? So if you see on the center bottom part, we expect that by 2030, when we're really relevant, there will be about 40 billion pounds of feedstock coming into the market, and we will be just 3 million. So it's really not that relevant, but still a really exciting opportunity in terms of scaling up. And in the same parallel for meal, we see ourselves as being 0.5 of the about $30 billion protein market in the U.S. And then our team. So we have quite a few people here that are former Monsanto people. So Jerry Steiner was an executive vice president with Monsanto for a long time. He's our CEO. He's traveling today. That's why you get me. And Tim Almosab is our CTO, also from Monsanto. Mark Messmer was the leader of the corn breeding program for Monsanto for many years. He leads our breeding program. I do strategy and ops. John Sudbrook is our main partner at Illinois State University. And Dr. Darielli is our regulatory person. He did regulatory for Roundup at Monsanto and was with Monsanto for a long time. Our two new hires that are very critical for us right now are Chris Albuck, who's doing agronomy and farmer relations, and Rahul, who's great on all the molecular genetics, and he is improving a lot the pace of the work that we're doing here. Picture of our team and some of the universities that we collaborate with. And I believe that's it. So I'm open to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Well, we really appreciate you walking us through the work and quite frankly, a lot of the progress that's been made on the work at CoverCress. I think one area that I'm curious about, and you touched on it, and it would just be, from a historical context, it seems like there's more and more opportunities for new crops to be brought to market, help decommoditize agriculture, bring more options to farmers going forward. Are there any historical precedents that you would point to as learning opportunities for good ways or bad ways to bring new crops to market, and sort of how that would apply to what you're doing at CoverCress?
Don't put me too much on the spot here. So what we do is we try to use as our success, or our goal is to be the new canola, right? So our products are very similar to canola, and we believe that canola was a really true success story. Lately, there were other crops that were in the same idea of oil production, like camelina, like carinata, that we do use as models to try to learn many things. So some of them, and then we hear, it depends on really who you ask, right? So camelina, there's more study on it, but camelina has one thing on the genetic side that it's polyploid. So pennycress, we were very lucky to start with this because pennycress is a diploid with a very small genome, and that makes all our genetic work much easier and much faster. So that's a plus that we have, that we just had it because of nature, not because of anything we did specifically. We do try to be careful with some things we hear on how to approach farmers, how to really go for this market. Another example that is really on the news all the time is hemp. So what we try to do is follow market leads on volumes, like I touched base on how we see ourselves if we are successful, what fraction of that market are we really going to be achieving. And we're only planning to launch this crop once we have the right timing, not only just for the product, but for farmer network and for the downstream part. So knowing exactly what happens once the farmer harvests this grain, what happens? Where does the farmer takes it? How long does he have to wait to deliver this? How long until he's paid? What are the parameters that he needs to meet to be able to get well paid for this grain? So all of these details, what we hear is that some stories of other new crops, they were not as detailed as what we are doing. And we're only able to do that because of some very unique things that we do. So like our executive team, for instance, most of them were already retired from Monsanto. This is kind of their new, really fun work to do, and they were only paid in equity, but we don't have the salaries for them. So then that makes us more flexible in terms of using our money. So we are very low cash burning rate, but because we know that we would have to extend the timing, because funding for startups is a very critical thing when the time is too long for investors, and that's understandable.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And I was wondering if you could jump back to the slide where you talk a little bit about some of the required processing and supply chain that is going to be a part of this business at some point. So when you think about this piece, how much, and maybe this isn't a good question, but as CoverCress becomes more successful on the technology side and really figures out, getting the technology the right level for commercialization, how much of this supply chain does it make sense for CoverCress as a company to be involved with or to own itself?
We already changed our mind on that a lot. So in the very beginning, when the company was founded, and for the very few years there, we had the idea to have our own processor or processing plant, and that we would start with just like the model would be small plants for every 100 miles, like a circle of 100 miles in diameter. And then we would have the plant in the center, and the farmer would just drop it there, and everything would be done there. And some of the early studies that we did showed that was feasible. Then we started involving more and more people, and as you start really looking for partners who understand this business very, very well, it became clear to us that this was a lot of very high investment. So it seemed to us that it made a lot more sense to look for partners who are willing to use even times when their plants were not fully at capacity to do our grain, because we're kind of off season, so we're inverted from everything else. That might make sense. So right now, this is the most likely scenario, is to have only collection points that are ours, and then everything else is partnered.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
Which doesn't, it makes sense, but sorry, I'm interrupting you, but it makes sense, but it also is not simple, because you do need a lot of volume to really get a processor to be interested in you.
Right. There's a little bit of chicken and egg, I think, when you're working on this type of model. And it's, I think the more and more that people like your team at CoverCress figure this problem out, the more feasible it will become for other companies. Like, we've had other new crop companies on Agrifood Conversation this month, like Stony Creek Colors, who's trying to bring natural indigo to market. And there's complexities there too, in figuring out the entire supply chain and doing so in a capital efficient manner, I think, is a challenge. But once there is more precedent for it, it may open the door for others.
Yes, definitely. And it is really tough because when you get a startup company, you usually have, I'm getting a lot of echo here, but usually the team is focused on product development. So you get a team around plant breeding and around molecular genetics or whatever it is related to the specific product you're developing. But then going all the way through the value chain is a lot of effort. It adds a lot of time and expertise. And so for startups, it's really hard.
One other area that I'm curious about before we wrap things up here today is on the farmer adoption side, which I think you covered really well, and is obviously something that you guys are thinking about a lot. Are the concerns from an adoption standpoint on their side more around the guaranteed pricing of the product they're going to be producing? So saying that we just want to make sure that if we plant it, we're going to get this margin per acre or this amount of revenue per acre, or is it more a concern about, is it going to be easy to grow? Is it going to be easy for us to work with? How much is the education curve? I imagine it's a little bit of a mixture of both, but does it skew one way or the other?
I think it's a combination, and I think we don't get many questions on is it easy to grow. I don't think they're very concerned on the biology of this. It is a very simple plant to grow. So, well, I shouldn't say that because it took us a few years to get around it. But now we believe we have our head circled around the whole growth season and all the pros and cons and the main things that you have to do. But it's not very complex. What they want is a combination of like, okay, I'll grow this. I'll start with 1/3 of my area or whatever fraction it is, depending on the size of the farm. Where do I deliver this? And will I be able to really harvest this in time to plant my soybeans? So for us, their questions are related to yield and timing. And when I put that arrow like between the CoverCress and the farmer with custom planting, that also some of them ask for custom harvesting. Because remember, when they are harvesting CoverCress, they're also planting corn and soy. So some of them they don't want the human component to be on the way of this working out. So they say, if you can offer custom planting and custom harvest, then I'm in. Because they don't have to do much. They have to go in and fertilize when they're not doing much with corn and soy. It's not planting time yet. So they're more concerned about their time and their soybean planting than they are with the biology of the crop itself.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Well, Chris, before we conclude here today, we always want to ask our hosts what are some things that the audience can do for you, as you build out a company that incorporates both biotechnology and farming and processing and supply chain. What are some either some immediate or some long-term needs that perhaps the audience could help you out with?
Okay, that's great. So one thing that I did not talk about is that this year the whole pennycress / CoverCress community got a CAP grant, which is a multi-organization grant, a USDA NIFA grant. It's a $10 million grant for 5 years, and we have 5 universities plus USDA and us on this project. So I'm actually leading the supply chain piece, which I'm just starting right now because it's the least developed part of all of this. So we have like agronomy and plant genetics. We have ecosystems, which we do have scientists who know what they're doing, helping out with this. And then supply chain is kind of like the last part that we're working with. So I can use help from people who are used to do this and have different ideas about new crops going about this. If you can share, I don't know how you share your information, but you can share my email and my phone number with the audience. And if they're willing to reach out for this, that'd be great. We're also working very much with farmer groups. So we're trying to do, especially now during the winter, whenever they're less busy, because we really don't want to get on the way of farmers, is to talk to them, learn from them, what are details that worry them about this situation. So if there are people in the audience who have those connections and would like to refer us to people who know this, that'll be also great. And investment, not so much right now. We'll have a small investment coming along, but we'll do an internal round. So investment, the serious investment will come like towards the end of 2020. So we're not really looking for that right now. I think the farmer side and the supply chain side are the main ones right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Well, Chris, first and foremost, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through today's presentation. Really exciting and fantastic work that you're doing. We're excited to have you on the call today. To everybody in the audience, thank you for participating on the webinar. If you'd like to learn more about CoverCress, please let us know by answering the following poll question. For anybody who is new here today, we host these calls every week, Thursdays at 3 p.m. Central. We do a new theme every month, and so you can check out past ones that we've done at agrifoodconversations.com, and a replay of this webinar will be emailed to you in the next 24 hours. But thank you for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.